Looking back on the nearly 10 years of marriage Emily and I had shared, I always thought we were the kind of couple that could weather anything. We met during our college years. She was a bright, ambitious undergrad with a passion for literature, and I was a med student, buried in books but captivated by her energy and charm. From the start, we balanced each other. She brought warmth and spontaneity into my otherwise structured life, while I gave her stability and a shoulder to lean on. By the time we hit our late 30s, life had settled into a comfortable routine. We lived in a modest but elegant two-bedroom apartment in downtown Chicago, close to both of our workplaces. The apartment was a reflection of us, a mix of her artistic sensibility and my practical nature. Shelves lined with books and framed photos from our travels gave the space character, while the sleek, modern furniture kept it functional. I worked long hours as a general surgeon, often spending late nights at the hospital. It was demanding, but I took pride in my career. Emily, on the other hand, had built a name for herself as an assistant professor at the local university, specializing in Renaissance literature. She loved her work, and her eyes would light up whenever she spoke about her students or her latest research. Despite our busy schedules, we made time for each other. Friday nights were sacred, reserved for takeout and Netflix, where we'd unwind together after a long week. Weekends were often spent at farmers markets, art galleries, or exploring new restaurants in the city. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I thought we were happy. Over the years, we developed our quirks and habits as a couple. I was the one who always remembered the little things, birthdays, anniversaries, even the day we adopted our dog, Baxter. Emily, on the other hand, was more spontaneous, often surprising me with small gestures, a handwritten note tucked into my lunch bag, or a new book she thought I'd like. It was a dynamic that worked well for us, or so I thought. But as we approached our 10th wedding anniversary, I started to notice small changes. Emily seemed more distracted than usual, her mind elsewhere even when we were together. I chalked it up to stress from work. After all, she'd recently taken on a heavier teaching load and had been working on a major paper she hoped to present at a conference. Still, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I pushed the thought aside, convincing myself that we were just going through a rough patch. Every couple did, right? Little did I know, those small changes were the beginning of something I never expected. For now, though, I held on to the belief that our marriage was strong enough to withstand anything. After all, we'd been through so much together, 10 years of love, laughter, and shared dreams. How could I have known that everything I thought I understood about our life was about to be turned upside down? Our everyday life felt like a well-oiled machine. We'd worked hard to create a balance that allowed us to pursue our careers while still cherishing the time we had together. It wasn't always easy. My job as a surgeon demanded long hours, and Emily's responsibilities at the university had grown over the years. But somehow, we made it work. Mornings were often rushed. I'd wake up at 5:30 a.m. to prepare for my first shift at the hospital, while Emily usually rolled out of bed around 7 a.m., groggily sipping her coffee before heading to campus. We had a system. I handled breakfasts and grocery shopping, while she took care of Baxter and managed most of the household chores. It wasn't glamorous, but it was efficient. Our apartment was our sanctuary. It wasn't the kind of place that turned heads, but it felt like home. The kitchen was where we spent the most time together, cooking simple meals and catching up on our day. The walls were painted in warm, earthy tones, and Emily's knack for decorating made the place feel cozy yet stylish. Shelves of books, mostly hers, lined the walls of the living room, with a few of my medical texts tucked away in the corner. A large abstract painting hung above the couch, one of Emily's favorite pieces from a local gallery. One of my favorite rituals was our Sunday evenings. After dinner, we'd pour ourselves a glass of wine and sit on the balcony overlooking the city. It wasn't the best view, mostly rooftops and a faint glimpse of the river, but it was ours. We'd talk about anything and everything, her plans for the semester, a new case I'd been working on, or dreams about the future. It was in those quiet moments that I felt closest to her, like we were partners in every sense of the word. As our 10th wedding anniversary approached, I started thinking about how to make it special. A decade of marriage felt like a milestone worth celebrating, and I wanted to show Emily how much she meant to me. I began planning a surprise, something thoughtful, something memorable. My schedule was hectic, but I made time to research venues, browse for gifts, and even contact a jeweler about designing a custom piece of jewelry. I knew Emily had been under a lot of pressure at work, so I hoped the celebration would give us a chance to reconnect. In my mind, this anniversary was more than just a date, it was a reminder of the love and partnership we'd built together. I wanted her to know how deeply I still cared, even after all these years. But as the weeks went on, I noticed her growing more distant. She started coming home later than usual, often with vague excuses about department meetings or staying late to help a student. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was passionate about her work, and I admired that about her. Still, a nagging feeling crept in. I tried to push it aside, telling myself that everything was fine. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the sense that something had shifted between us. I just didn't know what it was, or how much it would hurt when I finally found out. At first, I dismissed the changes as harmless. Emily had always been dedicated to her work, and her new teaching load seemed intense. She often talked about her department chair encouraging her to take on more responsibilities to prepare for a potential promotion to full professor. I was proud of her ambition and wanted to be supportive. But then, the late nights started becoming more frequent. It wasn't unusual for her to come home at 8 o'clock or 9 p.m., tired and distracted. She'd mention a departmental meeting, a last-minute review session with a student, or extra time spent preparing for her upcoming conference presentation. Her explanations were plausible, and I didn't want to be the kind of husband who questioned her every move. Still, little things began to gnaw at me. She'd been on her phone more often, sometimes stepping out of the room to take calls or answer messages. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd wave it off, saying it was a colleague or a student needing help. Once or twice, I caught her smiling at her screen in a way that seemed different. But when I asked about it, she'd say it was nothing, just a funny meme someone had sent. Then there were the excuses for why she couldn't join me for lunch or dinner. In the past, we'd made it a point to meet up at least once a week for a meal near her campus or the hospital. It was a small but meaningful way to stay connected amidst our busy lives. But lately, every time I suggested it, she'd tell me she was too swamped with work or had already made plans with colleagues. I tried to brush it off. Emily was a professor, after all, and academia had its own unique pressures. I convinced myself that this was just a busy season for her, that things would go back to normal once the conference was over or her schedule lightened up. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. One evening, she came home smelling faintly of cologne, not the perfume she usually wore, but a distinctly masculine scent. When I asked about it, she laughed and said one of her colleagues had accidentally spilled a drink on her jacket during a department meeting. She even showed me the faint stain on the sleeve as proof. Her explanation seemed reasonable, but it didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. The way she avoided eye contact when she spoke, the quick, almost rehearsed delivery of her excuse, it all felt off. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions. After all, we'd been married for nearly a decade, and I'd never had a reason to doubt her before. As the days turned into weeks, the distance between us grew. Conversations that used to flow naturally now felt strained, as though she was keeping me at arm's length. I tried to reach out, to ask if something was bothering her, but she'd always dismiss my concerns with a smile and a quick, "I'm just tired, that's all." Looking back, I wish I'd trusted my instincts sooner. But at the time, I wanted so badly to believe that everything was fine. That our marriage was as strong as I'd always thought it was. Little did I know, the cracks were already forming, and it wouldn't be long before the truth came crashing down around me. The changes in Emily's behavior started to weigh on me. I told myself not to overthink it, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had always been open with me, eager to share stories from her day or vent about her students. Now, when I asked how things were going at work, her answers were clipped, as if she didn't want to talk about it. Her late nights at the university became more frequent. "I have to prepare for the faculty review meeting," she'd say one evening. "I promised I'd help one of my grad students finalize their thesis," she explained another. Each excuse sounded reasonable enough, but when stacked together, they painted a different picture, one of someone who was avoiding being at home. There were other little things too. She'd started dressing more formally for work, swapping out her usual cardigans and slacks for tailored blouses and fitted skirts. When I complimented her on her new wardrobe, she smiled and said, "I just want to look professional. First impressions matter in academia." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But her answers felt hollow, like she was saying what I wanted to hear instead of the truth. Then there were the missed dinners. We'd always made it a point to eat together whenever we could, even if it was just a quick meal. But lately, Emily was either too busy or too distracted. One night, I prepared her favorite dish, chicken marsala, and waited for her to come home. She'd promised to be back by 7:30, but 8 o'clock came and went with no sign of her. When she finally walked through the door at 9 o'clock, she looked startled to see me waiting. "Oh," she said, setting her bag down. "I didn't realize you'd be up. I thought you'd already eaten." Her tone was casual, but something about it stung. "I made dinner," I said, gesturing to the untouched table. "You said you'd be home by 7:30. She glanced at the clock, her expression a mix of guilt and frustration. "I'm sorry, James. The meeting ran late, and then I had to stay back and grade some papers. You should have eaten without me." "It's not about the food," I replied, my voice quieter now. "It's about us. Lately, it feels like you're never here." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Work's been overwhelming, that's all. I'm trying to manage a lot right now, and I need you to understand that." I nodded, but her words didn't reassure me. They felt like another excuse, another way to push me away. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, I stared at the ceiling, wondering when things had started to change. Despite my growing doubts, I held on to the hope that our upcoming anniversary would be a turning point. 10 years together was a milestone, and I wanted to use the occasion to remind Emily of everything we'd built. I started planning a special celebration, something that would show her how much I still cared, even if things felt strained. But deep down, a small voice kept nagging at me, whispering that something wasn't right. And as much as I tried to ignore it, that voice was growing louder every day. Our 10th anniversary was more than just a date to me, it was a testament to the life we'd built together. 10 years of love, partnership, and shared dreams weren't something I took lightly. Despite the distance I felt growing between Emily and me, I believed this anniversary could reignite the spark we seemed to be losing. I started planning weeks in advance. I wanted to create a day that would sweep her off her feet, something memorable and meaningful. I booked a reservation at one of the most elegant restaurants in the city, a place we talked about visiting for years but never had the chance. It had everything, a romantic ambience, candlelit tables, and a menu crafted by a world-class chef. I even arranged for a private booth overlooking the city skyline. The centerpiece of my plan was a gift, something unique that would show her how much she meant to me. After browsing through countless ideas, I decided on a custom bracelet, engraved with the date of our wedding and the words, "Always and Forever." It felt personal, a tangible reminder of the promises we'd made to each other all those years ago. I juggled the preparations around my busy schedule at the hospital, sneaking in phone calls during breaks and making trips to the jeweler after work. The more I planned, the more excited I became. For me, this wasn't just about celebrating an anniversary, it was about reaffirming our bond and showing Emily that, no matter what, I was still deeply committed to us. As the day approached, I began dropping hints to Emily, hoping to pique her curiosity. "I have something special planned for next Friday," I said one evening, casually slipping it into conversation. "I think you're going to love it." She smiled but seemed distracted. "That sounds nice," she replied, her tone distant. "I'll have to check my schedule at the department. Things have been pretty hectic lately." Her lack of enthusiasm stung, but I brushed it off. She was stressed, I told myself. Once she saw everything I had planned, she'd realize how much thought I'd put into making this day unforgettable. In the days leading up to the anniversary, Emily's behavior continued to puzzle me. She seemed even busier than usual, spending long hours at the university and coming home visibly drained. I tried to be patient, giving her space while quietly finalizing the details of our celebration. On the morning of our anniversary, I woke up feeling hopeful. I left a small note on her pillow before heading to work, something sweet to start her day. "Happy 10th anniversary, Emily. Can't wait to celebrate tonight. Love always, James." I imagined her reading it, smiling to herself, maybe even texting me a thank you. But as the hours passed, my excitement was tempered by a growing sense of unease. She hadn't mentioned our anniversary at all in the past few days, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't as important to her as it was to me. Still, I held on to my optimism. This was our day, and I was determined to make it perfect. Little did I know, the perfect day I had envisioned was about to take a turn I could never have anticipated. The day had been busy at the hospital, but through the rush of surgeries and consultations, I couldn't stop thinking about the evening ahead. I'd arranged everything to perfection: the restaurant reservation, the bracelet neatly wrapped in a velvet box, and a bouquet of Emily's favorite lilies waiting at home. For me, this wasn't just an anniversary, it was a way to show her that despite the distance that had crept between us, my love and commitment remained as strong as ever. When I finally clocked out, I was exhausted but excited. I stopped by our apartment first to change into the tailored suit Emily had always complimented. As I adjusted my tie in the mirror, I pictured the look on her face when she saw the gift, the restaurant, and all the thought I'd poured into the evening. But when I stepped into the apartment, a strange feeling settled over me. The lights were off, and the space was eerily quiet. Normally, Emily would have left a lamp or two on, especially when she knew I'd be coming home before her. "Emily?" I called out, setting the bouquet on the counter. No response. I checked my phone, wondering if she'd sent a text while I was busy at work. Nothing. No missed calls, no messages, nothing to indicate she was running late or had remembered the significance of the day at all. As the minutes ticked by, my anticipation began to curdle into anxiety. By 7:30 p.m., the time we were supposed to be sitting down at the restaurant, there was still no sign of her. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I sat on the couch, staring at the bouquet and the small gift box on the coffee table, a sinking feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't like Emily. She might have been distant lately, but she wasn't careless, and she certainly wasn't the type to forget something as important as our 10th anniversary. Or was she? Around 8:15 p.m., I heard the jingle of keys in the door. Emily walked in, balancing a stack of papers and her tote bag on one arm. She froze when she saw me sitting there, dressed for the occasion, with the flowers and gift clearly visible. "Oh," she said, her voice faltering. "What's all this?" My heart sank. Her tone wasn't surprised in the way I'd hoped, it was confused, as if she had no idea what was going on. "It's our anniversary, Emily," I said, my voice strained. "Our 10th anniversary. I made plans for us tonight. Where have you been?" Her eyes widened, a mix of shock and guilt flashing across her face. "Oh my God, James. I completely forgot. I'm so sorry. I've been so caught up with work and," her voice trailed off, and she fumbled for an explanation. "You forgot?" I repeated, struggling to keep my composure. "Emily, this isn't just any day. It's 10 years. 10 years of us. She set her things down, taking a step toward me, her hands outstretched in an attempt to console me. I know. I've been so overwhelmed lately. I didn't mean to forget. Can we reschedule? We can celebrate this weekend. Reschedule? I snapped, the frustration bubbling to the surface. Do you even care about this marriage anymore? About us? Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. But then something in her expression changed, she looked almost defensive. James, I've been working so hard. I've been under so much pressure at the department. Can't you understand that? I didn't respond. I couldn't. The weight of her words, the excuses, and the growing distance between us all pressed down on me at once. As I stared at her, a thought crept into my mind, a question I'd been avoiding for weeks. What else had she been doing that was more important than us? The question lingered, unspoken, but its implications were starting to become impossible to ignore. Emily's apology that night felt hollow, a hastily assembled excuse meant to deflect rather than address the growing chasm between us. I didn't press her further, my emotions were too raw, and I knew that if I let myself speak, the anger bubbling inside would spill out in ways I might regret. Instead, I said nothing, retreating to the bedroom while she sat alone in the living room. The next day, the tension between us was palpable. She left for work early, avoiding eye contact, mumbling something about a department meeting. I nodded wordlessly, my mind still replaying the scene from the night before. Her behavior, her excuses, they all gnawed at me. I decided to dig deeper. That evening, when Emily was still at work, I went into her study. It wasn't something I'd normally do, our mutual respect for each other's space had always been an unspoken rule. But last night's events had shaken me, and I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion that something wasn't right. Her desk was meticulously organized, as always, papers stacked neatly, books lined up by topic. Her laptop sat in the center, closed but not locked. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the touchpad. Was I crossing a line? Would I even find anything? But the unanswered questions were too much to bear. I opened the laptop, navigating to her email. It didn't take long to find something odd. There, in her sent folder, were a series of emails to a name I didn't recognize, Dr. Thomas Mitchell. They weren't blatantly incriminating, but there was an unmistakable familiarity in her tone, the kind of warmth and informality that didn't align with the strictly professional relationship she described. The latest email was the most telling. Thank you for last night. It's always so nice to have someone who understands. Can't wait for the next meeting. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, rereading the message over and over, hoping I'd somehow misunderstood. But the implications were clear. Who was this man? What had happened last night? And how long had this been going on? I closed the laptop and stepped back, my mind spinning. Emily's late nights, her vague excuses, her growing distance, all of it suddenly made sense. This wasn't just a case of her being too busy or forgetting our anniversary. This was something much bigger, something that cut deeper than I could have imagined. When Emily came home that evening, I confronted her. Who's Thomas Mitchell? I asked, my voice steady but laced with tension. She froze, the color draining from her face. What? Why are you asking about him? Don't play dumb, Emily. I saw your emails. Thank you for last night. What exactly are you thanking him for? Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. The silence between us stretched into a heavy, suffocating pause. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. James, it's not what you think. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Not what I think. Then tell me, Emily. What is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife has been meeting another man behind my back. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not this time. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, she said, her voice cracking. We've been so distant, and I've been feeling so lost, and he was just there. Her words were like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. I didn't want to hear more, but I needed to know. How long? I asked, my voice hollow. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, looking away. A few months, she admitted. But I swear, James, I didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened, I interrupted, finishing the sentence for her. That's the best you can come up with? I stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd spent a decade building a life with. In that moment, everything felt like a lie. The weight of her betrayal was crushing, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if we could ever recover from it. That night, after Emily admitted the affair, I didn't know how to process what I was feeling. My emotions were a chaotic mess, anger, heartbreak, humiliation, and disbelief all crashing into each other like waves in a storm. I left the apartment without saying another word. I needed air, space, anything to escape the suffocating reality of what I'd just learned. I wandered aimlessly through the city, the sounds of traffic and distant chatter blending into a dull hum in the background. My mind kept replaying her words, it wasn't supposed to mean anything. I didn't mean for it to happen. But how could something like this just happen? It wasn't a mistake or an accident, it was a choice. A series of choices that she had made, knowing full well the consequences. I found myself at a small park near the river, one of the places Emily and I used to visit when we first started dating. Back then, everything had felt so simple. We'd sit on the benches, talking for hours about our dreams and plans for the future. Those memories felt like a cruel mockery now, reminders of a life that no longer existed. When I finally returned to the apartment, it was past midnight. The lights were off, but I knew Emily was awake. She was sitting in the dark on the couch, her silhouette barely visible against the glow of the city lights outside. I didn't think you'd come back, she said quietly, her voice heavy with guilt. I almost didn't, I replied, my tone flat. She turned to look at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. James, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I don't even know how to explain what I was thinking. Don't, I cut her off, holding up a hand. Don't try to justify it. Don't tell me you were feeling lost, or that it didn't mean anything. You knew exactly what you were doing, Emily. You chose this. Her tears started again, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. I need you to tell me everything, I said, my voice cold. No more lies. No more half-truths. I want the whole story. She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she might refuse. But then she nodded, wiping her face with trembling hands. It started a few months ago, she began, her voice barely audible. Thomas is the department chair. We worked closely on a research project, and I don't know. One day, we went out for coffee after a meeting, and things just escalated from there. It wasn't planned, James. I swear, I never intended for it to go this far. How far did it go? I asked bluntly, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Her silence was answer enough. Was it physical? I pressed, my heart pounding. She nodded, her face crumpling as she started sobbing again. Yes, she whispered. But it wasn't about him, James. It was never about him. I felt like we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. Her words felt like a slap in the face. So your solution was to betray me? To run to someone else instead of talking to me? Do you have any idea what you've done, Emily? What you've destroyed? She tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back, the distance between us feeling insurmountable. I don't know if I can ever forgive this, I said, my voice breaking. You didn't just betray me, you destroyed the trust we built over 10 years. And I don't know if we can come back from that." Her sobs filled the silence, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. That night, I slept on the couch, unable to bear being near her. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her betrayal settled over me like a crushing burden. In my heart, I knew that things would never be the same again. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever endured. Emily seemed desperate to fix things, to convince me that what she'd done didn't have to mean the end of our marriage. But every time she tried to talk to me, her words felt hollow, like someone trying to patch a sinking ship with tape. "James, please," she'd say, her voice breaking. "I know I messed up, but I love you. I'll do anything to make this right." But how could she make it right? The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship was gone, shattered into pieces too small to put back together. I wanted to believe her, to believe that she was truly sorry, that we could somehow rebuild, but every time I looked at her, all I could see was her betrayal. Her efforts to repair things only seemed to make it worse. She started leaving me notes, little letters apologizing for what she'd done and promising to change. I found one tucked into my jacket pocket as I left for work, another slipped under my coffee mug in the morning. They all said the same thing: "I love you. Please don't give up on us." But love wasn't the problem. I didn't doubt that she loved me, at least in some way. The problem was that she had taken that love and twisted it, betraying me in the most personal and intimate way possible. At night, she'd try to reach out to me, sitting on the edge of the couch where I now slept. "I miss you," she whispered one evening, her voice thick with tears. "I miss us." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Her words felt like salt in a wound that refused to heal. Work became my only refuge. I started picking up extra shifts at the hospital, volunteering for the most grueling assignments just to keep myself busy. The long hours left me physically exhausted, but at least I didn't have to think about what was waiting for me at home. Emily, for her part, didn't give up. She stopped seeing Thomas immediately, dropping the research project and cutting all contact with him. She started coming home earlier, making an effort to spend time with me even when I barely acknowledged her presence. She even suggested counseling, though I couldn't bring myself to agree. "I don't need a stranger telling me how to feel," I said one night when she brought it up. "I just want us to try," she replied. "I'll do anything, James. Please, just give me a chance." Her desperation was obvious, but it didn't move me. The pain and anger I felt were too overwhelming, drowning out any hope of reconciliation. As the weeks went on, it became clear that our attempts to salvage the marriage were failing. We barely spoke, existing as strangers in the same space. Every time she tried to bridge the gap, I pulled further away, unable to forget what she'd done. The woman I had loved for 10 years was still there, but she felt like a ghost, someone I recognized but no longer knew. And no matter how much she apologized or how hard she tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already broken beyond repair. As the weeks turned into months, the weight of everything began to take its toll on me. I had always been someone who thrived under pressure, my career as a surgeon demanded it. But now, the steady confidence I relied on seemed to falter. The betrayal, the constant tension at home, and my inability to move past it were like a storm cloud I couldn't escape. I began making mistakes at work, small ones at first, the kind that were easy to correct but unusual for me. A wrong dosage written on a chart. Forgetting to sign off on a patient's post-op instructions. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to draw concerned glances from my colleagues. "James, you okay?" Dr. Patel, one of my closest friends at the hospital, asked one day after I'd forgotten to prep for a procedure. "I'm fine," I replied, brushing him off. "Just tired." But I wasn't fine. The truth was, I hadn't slept well in months. Nights were the worst, filled with restless tossing and turning on the couch, my mind replaying the same scenes over and over: Emily's confession, the emails to Thomas, her tearful apologies. The questions I couldn't answer gnawed at me endlessly. How could she do this? Was there something I'd missed? Something I'd done wrong? The emotional strain started to bleed into every aspect of my life. I found it harder to focus, harder to summon the energy I needed to be the kind of doctor my patients deserved. I began avoiding my coworkers, eating lunch alone in my office and leaving as soon as my shifts were over. At home, things were no better. Emily had stopped trying to talk to me, likely realizing that every conversation ended in the same way, with me shutting her out. The silence between us grew heavier, a constant reminder of the gulf her actions had created. Then came the day I couldn't keep it together anymore. It was a routine surgery, one I'd performed dozens of times before. Everything was going smoothly until I made a misstep, a careless incision that caused unnecessary bleeding. My team acted quickly, and the patient was fine in the end, but the mistake shook me to my core. Afterward, I sat alone in the break room, my head in my hands. The realization hit me like a freight train, I couldn't keep going like this. The betrayal had seeped into every part of my life, consuming me in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. Later that week, I requested a leave of absence. It wasn't an easy decision. I'd always taken pride in my work, and stepping away felt like admitting defeat. But I knew I wasn't in the right headspace to care for my patients. When I told Emily, she looked devastated. "James," she said softly, reaching for my hand, "I had no idea it had gotten this bad. You should have told me." I pulled my hand away, the gesture more instinctive than deliberate. "What would you have done, Emily? You can't fix this. You're the reason I'm like this in the first place." The words came out harsher than I intended, but they were the truth. Her betrayal had set off a chain reaction I couldn't stop, no matter how much I wanted to. For the first time in weeks, she didn't argue. She just nodded, her eyes filled with tears, and left me alone. The leave of absence gave me time to think, but it didn't bring the relief I'd hoped for. Instead, it felt like another reminder of how far I'd fallen, how much my life had been upended. I spent my days in a haze, unsure of what to do or how to move forward. The man I used to be, the confident surgeon, the devoted husband, felt like a stranger. And I had no idea how to find my way back to him. The stress and emotional weight I carried began to manifest physically. At first, it was small things, a persistent headache here, a restless night there. But as weeks turned into months, the symptoms grew harder to ignore. Sleep became elusive. No matter how tired I felt, my mind wouldn't stop racing. I'd close my eyes and see flashes of Emily's tearful face or imagine the conversations she must have had with Thomas. I tried everything, reading until my eyes burned, listening to calming music, even over-the-counter sleep aids, but nothing worked. The most I could manage was a few hours of fitful rest, and it left me dragging through the days in a fog. My appetite vanished as well. I'd force myself to eat something small, toast, a piece of fruit, but it felt like a chore. Even when Emily cooked, her efforts to reconnect through shared meals fell flat. I barely touched my plate, and she'd sit across from me in silence, her eyes filled with worry. The weight loss came quickly. My suits began to hang off me, my face grew gaunt, and dark circles etched themselves under my eyes. People started noticing. Mike, one of the nurses I worked with before my leave, called to check in. "You okay, James? You don't sound like yourself," he said. "I'm fine," I lied, the words automatic. "Just trying to take it easy." But I wasn't fine. My body felt like it was betraying me, shutting down under the strain of everything I was carrying. I started getting chest pains, sharp, sudden jabs that would leave me clutching my side. The first time it happened, I dismissed it as stress. The second time, I started to worry. By the third, Emily noticed. "You need to see someone," she said firmly, standing over me as I sat hunched on the couch, catching my breath after another episode. "This isn't normal, James. Why do you care?" I snapped, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. "You're the one who broke me in the first place." Her face crumpled, but she didn't back down. "Because I love you," she said quietly. "And I can't stand to see you like this." I wanted to tell her to leave me alone, to let me wallow in my misery. But deep down, I knew she was right. My body was screaming at me to get help, and if I ignored it, I'd end up in worse shape than I already was. Reluctantly, I made an appointment with my primary care physician. The visit was sobering. The doctor ran a series of tests and found nothing immediately alarming, but he didn't mince words about the toll my stress was taking on me. "Your blood pressure is elevated, and your weight loss is concerning," he said, flipping through his notes. "But what worries me most is your mental state. You can't keep running yourself into the ground like this, James." "I know," I muttered, though I wasn't sure I believed it. He recommended rest, a balanced diet, and stress management techniques. He also suggested therapy, which I declined. The idea of opening up to a stranger felt like another layer of vulnerability I wasn't ready for. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me. She'd started doing that more often lately, cutting back her hours at the university so she could be around. "What did the doctor say?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Nothing I didn't already know," I replied, brushing past her. But the truth was, the visit had shaken me. I wasn't just emotionally broken, I was physically falling apart. And for the first time, I began to wonder if I could survive this spiral, or if it would consume me entirely. Emily's concern for me seemed to intensify after the doctor's visit. It was as if seeing me so visibly unwell reminded her of the damage she'd caused, or maybe she simply couldn't bear the guilt anymore. Whatever her reasons, she started trying harder to repair what was left of our relationship, though I wasn't sure there was anything left to save. She began taking on responsibilities that she'd once left to me. Grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, things I'd always done because of her busy schedule, suddenly became her domain. She prepared my favorite meals, even though I barely touched them. She rearranged the living room to make it cozier, lighting candles in the evenings and turning on soft music to create an atmosphere of comfort I could no longer feel. Most notably, she started coming to my follow-up appointments, sitting quietly in the corner of the exam room while the doctor asked me about my symptoms. At first, I resented her presence. Her actions felt like an attempt to insert herself into my healing process, to force me to see that she still cared. But over time, her persistence began to chip away at my defenses. One evening, I woke from another restless nap on the couch to find Emily sitting beside me. She wasn't crying this time, her eyes were steady, her expression calm. "James," she said softly, "I know I've lost your trust. And I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I need you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, no matter how long it takes." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with sincerity. I wanted to believe her, to trust that she was truly remorseful, but the walls I'd built around myself were still too high. "Being here doesn't fix what you did," I said, my voice cold. "It doesn't erase the choices you made." "I know," she replied, her voice steady. "But it's all I can do. I can't change the past, James. All I can do is prove to you that I'm willing to fight for us." Her determination was relentless. Over the next few weeks, she tried everything to make amends. She brought me books from the library, ones she thought I'd enjoy based on the novels we used to read together. She arranged small outings, walks in the park, visits to quiet cafes, hoping to coax me out of the house and into the world again. When I resisted, she didn't push. She simply stayed by my side, a quiet presence in my increasingly fractured life. One day, as I sat at the kitchen table, picking at a plate of eggs she'd made, she placed a small envelope in front of me. "What's this?" I asked, not looking up. "It's an idea," she said. "For our anniversary." I froze, the weight of her words sinking in. The memory of our 10th anniversary, her forgetting it entirely, her betrayal coming to light, was still fresh, a wound that hadn't fully healed. "I know it doesn't mean much right now," she continued, her voice faltering. "But I've been thinking about next year. About what I could do to show you how much you mean to me." I opened the envelope, revealing a simple handwritten note. It outlined a plan for a small celebration, just the two of us, in a cabin upstate. No grand gestures, no elaborate surprises. Just time together, away from everything. I didn't respond right away. The idea of celebrating another anniversary felt absurd, like pretending the past year hadn't happened. But something about her effort, her vulnerability, made me pause. For the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of the Emily I'd fallen in love with, the woman who used to leave me notes in my lunch bag, who always found ways to make me smile. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. In the weeks following Emily's heartfelt gesture, something began to shift between us. It wasn't an immediate fix, nor was it a sweeping change that erased the pain of the past year. But it was a beginning, a tentative, fragile step toward healing. Her efforts to make amends didn't waver. She continued to prioritize my well-being, from cooking meals I could barely bring myself to eat to gently encouraging me to take short walks around the neighborhood. She even started visiting Baxter's grave with me, a ritual I'd kept private since losing him months earlier. One evening, as we stood silently at the small stone marker we'd placed for him in a nearby park, Emily broke the quiet. "I think about him a lot," she said softly. "About how happy he made us." I nodded, my throat tightening. He was the best part of our mornings. For a moment, the shared memory seemed to bridge the distance between us. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was connection, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel for so long. Despite my reluctance, I eventually agreed to her proposal for our next anniversary. It wasn't about pretending things were back to normal, it was about seeing if we could still find a reason to celebrate what we once had. I didn't trust her completely, not yet, but I decided to give her the chance to show me she was serious about rebuilding what we'd lost. As the months passed, I focused on recovering not just physically but emotionally. I started eating more regularly and even ventured back to the hospital for short, supervised shifts. The work wasn't easy, but it reminded me of who I used to be, someone capable, someone who thrived under pressure. Emily's support never wavered. She drove me to appointments, waited outside exam rooms, and listened patiently when I needed to vent. She didn't press me to talk about the affair or push for answers about where we stood. Instead, she simply showed up, day after day, proving through her actions that she was committed to making things right. One night, as we sat together on the couch, a space I'd avoided for so long, Emily handed me a small, wrapped gift. "What's this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Open it," she said, her voice tentative. Inside was a photo book, filled with pictures from our 10 years together. Trips we'd taken, holidays spent with family, candid shots from our early dating days. On the last page, she'd written a simple message. "I know I hurt you, and I can never undo that. But I'm still here. I'm still fighting for us. And I hope one day, you'll see how much you mean to me." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel, forgiveness. It wasn't complete, and it didn't erase the hurt, but it was a start. As our 11th anniversary approached, Emily took charge of the planning. She arranged the cabin getaway she'd proposed months earlier, carefully organizing every detail without my input. It was her way of showing me that she still cared, that she still believed in us, even after everything that had happened. When the day finally arrived, we packed our bags and drove upstate together. The cabin was small but cozy, nestled in a quiet clearing surrounded by trees. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. That evening, as we sat by the fire, Emily turned to me with a look of quiet determination. "James," she said, taking my hand in hers, "thank you for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm so grateful. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with sincerity. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. Our 11th anniversary was unlike any we'd shared before. It wasn't lavish or grand, but it was heartfelt, a quiet celebration of second chances. Emily had thought of everything, from the candles on the dining table to the playlist of songs we'd loved in the early years of our marriage. The cabin felt like a world away from the chaos we'd left behind. Outside, the cool autumn breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Inside, the fire crackled softly, filling the space with warmth and light. It was simple, but it was enough. After dinner, Emily handed me a small, wrapped gift. My chest tightened as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a journal, its leather cover embossed with my initials. "I thought maybe it could help," she said, her voice soft. "For the days when it's hard to talk, or when you just need a place to put everything you're feeling." Her thoughtfulness caught me off guard. I ran my fingers over the smooth leather, a lump forming in my throat. "Thank you," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. We spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, for the first time in what felt like years. Emily shared how she'd felt in the months leading up to the affair, how she'd let her insecurities and stress drive her to make choices she regretted every day. "I don't expect you to understand," she said, her voice trembling. "But I need you to know how sorry I am. Not just for what I did, but for how I let it hurt you. You didn't deserve any of it." Her vulnerability left me speechless. For so long, I'd carried the pain of her betrayal like a shield, using it to keep her at a distance. But in that moment, I saw the depth of her remorse, and it was impossible to ignore. "I'm not the same person I was before all this," I admitted. "I don't know if I'll ever be. But I want to try. For us." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. "That's all I could ever ask for," she whispered. The rest of the weekend felt like a reset, a chance to rebuild the foundation of our marriage. We went for long walks in the woods, cooked breakfast together in the tiny kitchen, and sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't the blind optimism I'd once had, too much had happened for that, but it was enough to remind me why I'd fallen in love with Emily in the first place. When we returned home, things didn't magically fall into place. There were still moments of doubt, still nights when the weight of everything threatened to pull me under. But there were also moments of connection, of quiet gestures that spoke louder than words. Emily continued to show me through her actions that she was committed to making things right. She organized her schedule to ensure she had more time at home, and she set boundaries at work to avoid falling into the same patterns that had driven us apart. I, too, began to put in the work. I started journaling, pouring my thoughts onto the pages of the leather-bound book she'd given me. It wasn't easy, but it helped me sort through the tangled mess of emotions I'd carried for so long. With time, the cracks in our marriage began to heal. They didn't disappear entirely, but they no longer felt insurmountable. We were still a work in progress, but for the first time, I believed we had a future worth fighting for. Looking back on everything, it's hard to believe how far we've come. A year ago, I was convinced my marriage was over, shattered beyond repair. The betrayal had cut so deeply that I didn't think I could ever forgive Emily, let alone find a way to rebuild the life we had shared. But here we are, a year later, still standing. The journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty. There were moments when the pain felt too much to bear, when the anger and distrust threatened to consume me. I had to face parts of myself I wasn't proud of, the resentment, the bitterness, the fear of vulnerability. And Emily had to confront her own flaws, owning up to her choices and working tirelessly to prove that she was worthy of a second chance. If there's one thing this experience has taught me, it's that love isn't always enough. Love alone can't fix what's broken or undo the damage caused by betrayal. What matters is the effort, the willingness to fight for each other even when it feels impossible. Emily and I are still rebuilding, and I don't think the scars of what happened will ever fully fade. But that's okay. Those scars are a reminder of what we've been through and how far we've come. They're a testament to our resilience and the strength it takes to keep moving forward. To anyone who might find themselves in a similar situation, would say this: healing takes time. It's not a straight path, and it's not something you can rush. Trust has to be earned, and forgiveness has to come from a place of genuine understanding, not just for the other person, but for yourself. I'm not the same man I was before Emily's betrayal, and she's not the same woman. But in a way, that's a good thing. We've grown, learned, and become more honest with each other than we ever were before. On our most recent anniversary, the one I didn't think we'd ever celebrate, Emily said something that stuck with me. "I don't want us to forget what happened, James. I want us to remember it, so we never let it happen again." Her words hit me deeply, because they spoke to the truth of our journey. What we went through wasn't something to be swept under the rug or ignored. It was a part of our story, one that would always be with us. But it didn't define us. Now, as we move forward, I feel a cautious sense of hope. It's not blind optimism, and it's not without its struggles. But it's real, and it's enough to remind me that even in the darkest moments, there's a chance for light. The moral of the story: relationships are fragile, and trust is precious. Once it's broken, it takes extraordinary effort to rebuild. But if both people are willing to put in the work, if they're truly committed to growth, honesty, and accountability, it's possible to come out stronger on the other side. We're proof of that. And while our story isn't perfect, it's ours. And for now, that's enough.